The air within the abyss was thick, oppressive, and suffocating, as though the darkness itself had substance, clutching at Mara's skin with icy fingers. Her every breath came ragged, shallow, each inhale a struggle against the choking void that threatened to consume both body and mind. The distant echoes of children's cries drifted through the cavernous blackness, their mournful wails weaving a tapestry of sorrow and dread that surrounded her like a living thing. It was not just sound. It was a presence, a palpable sorrow that seeped into her bones. Mara's fingers brushed against the rough stone walls, slick with dampness that was more illusion than reality here. The abyss seemed to bleed memories. Her heart hammered in her chest, a frantic rhythm to match the rising tide of visions that began to press behind her eyelids. The darkness flickered and shifted, and suddenly spectral images bloomed around her like ghostly murals painted in shades of despair. She saw the faces of children long vanished, their eyes wide with fear and innocence betrayed. They were frozen in moments of terrible sacrifice, small hands reaching out, voices stifled by heavy silence. Elders cloaked in ritual garb moved with solemn purpose, their faces hidden behind cracked masks, chanting prayers that twisted into curses. The well, once a source of life, now pulsed sickly with a black, viscous liquid that ebbed and flowed like a heartbeat of darkness. The Hollow One emerged from the shadows of these visions, a formless shape shifting with impossible fluidity. Its endless ice bits of despair absorbed all light, all hope. Mara felt its hunger, an insatiable thirst that gnawed at the edges of her sanity, whispering promises of oblivion should she choose to surrender. The entity's voice slithered through her mind, cold and relentless, a siren song of nothingness that threatened to unravel the fragile threads of her resolve. Pain lanced through Mara's temples as the visions intensified, each image more vivid, more wrenching than the last. She saw the town's forgotten past laid bare, the origins of the Hollow One intertwined. With desperate acts of faith and sacrifice, the price exacted in innocent blood. The desert's parched earth was not merely a backdrop, but a crucible where hope was smelted into despair. Her mind threatened to fracture under the ceaseless onslaught, a tempest of memories and fears that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. The well's hunger was a living curse, a cycle of loss and submission etched into the very soul of Arroyo Seco. Yet within the depths of her torment, a spark endured a fierce flame of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Summoning every ounce of strength, Mara clenched her fists, the nails biting into her palms as she forced herself to breathe, to focus. Her eyes, sharp and burning with determination, pierced the darkness. She would not yield. Tomas was still out there, lost in the shadows, and she would find him. She would break the cycle, no matter the cost. The abyss around her seemed to pulse in response, the darkness recoiling from her will, even as it sought to engulf her. Mara took a tentative step forward, then another, each one a battle against the despair that clawed at her heart. The visions faded, replaced by the cold, unyielding silence of the well's endless depths. As she pressed onward, Mara felt the weight of the past lift slightly, the heavy shroud of the town's sins momentarily parted by her resolve. But the journey was far from over. Ahead awaited the core of the curse, the heart of the Hollow One's hunger, a confrontation that would test the limits of her courage and sanity. Yet, even in the darkest of places, a fragile hope flickered. The air turned viscous, thickening with the suffocating weight of the abyss, as Mara took a hesitant step forward, her senses dulled by the endless blackness, strained to catch any sign of life or death lurking in the depths below. Arroyo Seco, the faint echoes of dripping water, impossibly distant, mingled with the whispering silence that seemed to seep from the very walls of the well. Suddenly, a ripple of shadows stirred ahead, coalescing into an amorphous form that defied definition. It pulsed and shifted, a living absence of light that chilled Mara to her core. Two deep pits of darkness manifested where eyes might have been, drawing in the feeble glow of her lantern and swallowing it whole. The Hollow One had revealed itself. Mara's breath hitched as she took a defensive stance. The well's curse, the whispered sacrifices, the vanished children all converged into this formless nightmare. The entity's presence was an oppressive hunger, a thirst that reached beyond flesh and bone into the very soul. It exuded a cold that burned like the desert sun, an endless craving that no sacrifice could sat. The shadow lunged, tendrils unfurling like sinuous serpents made of night. They twisted through the air with a serpentine grace, seeking to ensnare Mara's limbs and drag her into oblivion. She dodged with desperate agility, her heartbeat roaring in her ears louder than the silence around her. The acrid scent of dust and decay clung to the creature, mingling with the metallic tang of fear rising in her throat. Her hands trembled as she gripped the relic she had taken from Iliazen, ancient amulet etched with faded symbols of protection. Raising it, she whispered a prayer that felt foreign on her tongue, a plea for salvation from the abyss. The Hollow One recoiled as the amulet's faint glow cast fragile light into the darkness. The tendrils writhed in agony, retreating momentarily, but the entity's hunger did not wane. It lashed out with renewed fury, battering Mara's mind with visions of the lost children laughing, crying, disappearing into the well's insatiable maw. Their faces blurred and shifted into twisted masks of despair and longing, pressing against the veil between worlds. Mara staggered, clutching her temples as the psychic assault threatened to shatter her sanity. The well's endless thirst was not just physical, it was spiritual, a void that consumed hope and replaced it with dread. She collapsed to her knees, the amulet slipping from her grasp to clatter against the jagged stones. But deep inside, a flicker of defiance kindled. Mara forced herself to breathe, to focus beyond the torment. She remembered Tomas's wide eyes, his innocent smile, the fragile hope he represented. This fight was not just for herself, but for every child swallowed by the well's darkness. Summoning every shard of strength, Mara reached down and seized the amulet once more. With a cry that echoed through the abyss, she thrust it toward the Hollow One. The light flared, splintering the shadow into writhing fragments that hissed and recoiled like wounded beasts. For a fleeting moment, the darkness faltered, and Mara glimpsed the abyss beyond, a barren desert of endless thirst, a void where faith turned to madness and sacrifice fed an eternal hunger. The well was more than a dried-up source of water, was a gateway to oblivion, a curse woven into the very fabric of Arroyos. The Hollow One's eyes burned with renewed intensity, promising that this battle was far from over. As the shadow dissolved into the dark corners of the abyss, Mara rose unsteady but unbroken. The fight had revealed the true nature of the entity and the terrifying cost of hope. She knew now that to save Tomas, she must confront not only the darkness beneath, but the blind faith above. The well's hunger was endless, but so was her determination. And as she climbed from the abyss, the oppressive silence of the well whispered a chilling promise. The children were not gone, they were waiting. Mara's eyes burned with a new fire, even as the shadows clung to her like a second skin. The Hollow One had been revealed, but the story was far from over. Somewhere in the darkness, her brother waited, and so did the next sacrifice. The battle had begun. The darkness was suffocating, an oppressive void that pressed against Mara's skin like the desert's relentless heat clinging to parched earth. Every breath she took was thick, dry, as if the very air had been drained of moisture, leaving only dust and despair to fill her lungs. The abyss beneath the Royal Secco was no mere hole in the ground. It was a living maw, an endless pit that seemed to drink hope as voraciously as it devoured children. Mara's hands trembled as she felt the rough stone beneath her fingers, fragments of the well's ancient walls crumbling into dust under her grip. The faintest glimmer of light from her flickering lantern cast monstrous shadows that writhed and shifted, twisting into forms that defied logic. And then, from the depths of that darkness, the Hollow One emerged, an amorphous shadow, its edges fluid and restless, eyes twin abysses that seemed to suck in all light and warmth. A cold dread surged through Mara's veins, a primal fear that clawed at the edges of her sanity. The Hollow One's presence felt like a physical weight pressing down, crushing her spirit with its insatiable thirst. It was the embodiment of everything the well demanded: sacrifice, hunger, oblivion. The entity was not simply a beast. It was a force of nature, a curse woven into the very fabric of the town's existence. Yet Mara stood her ground, every muscle coiled with tension. The weight of Tomas's absence burned like a brand on her heart, fueling a fierce resolve that blazed through the consuming darkness. She would not let the well claim her brother, not without a fight. The Hollow One shifted, its form undulating like smoke caught in a violent wind. It lashed out with tendrils of shadow, each one seeking to ensnare Mara's limbs and drag her into the abyss. She dodged and weaved, the jagged edges of the well's stone scraping her skin as she moved, pain a distant echo compared to the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. In a desperate bid, Mara seized a shard of the broken well stone, its rough edges cold but solid in her hand. She swung it blindly, striking the shadowy tendrils with a crackling burst of ethereal light. The Hollow One recoiled, a soundless scream rippling through the void that reverberated in Mara's bones. Amidst the chaos, a sudden vision pierced Mara's mind, a fleeting glimpse of the children who had vanished over the years. Pale, translucent figures hovered just beyond the shadows, their faces etched with silent screams and eyes wide with unending fear. They reached out to her, beseeching, their presence a haunting reminder of the cost of the town's survival. Mara's heart clenched with a sorrow so deep it threatened to shatter her. But with that pain came a steely determination. She would not let their fate be hers or Tomas's. The shard in her hand became a symbol of fragile hope, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The battle raged on, a brutal dance of shadow and light. The Hollow One lashed out with renewed fury, its thirst manifesting as a corrosive dryness that sucked the moisture from Mara's skin and filled her mouth with dust. Her vision blurred, and a choking dryness gripped her throat, threatening to extinguish her last breath. But through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Mara's thoughts anchored on Tomas. She imagined his small, sun-bleached hair and wide, innocent eyes, how he had always been drawn to the well's edge, fascinated and unaware of the darkness beneath. Clutching the shard tighter, she pushed forward, a surge of protective love burning through her like wildfire. The Hollow One shuddered, as if sensing the strength of her resolve. Its form flickered, unstable for the first time, and Mara seized the moment. With a cry that echoed through the abyss, she drove the shard deep into the shadowy mass. The entity screamed in silence, a wave of darkness rippling outward before it began to retreat, dissolving into the void from which it had come. Gasping for breath, Mara collapsed beside a small figure curled against the cold stone floor. Tomas. His eyes fluttered open, wide with confusion but alive. Relief crashed over Mara in a tidal wave, mingling with exhaustion and the bitter knowledge that the cost of survival was far from over. As she gathered Tomas in her arms, the chilling truth settled over her like the desert night. The well's hunger was eternal, its thirst never quenched. The sacrifice demanded would continue, and the town remained trapped in its relentless cycle. Yet within Mara, a fragile ember of hope took hold. She had faced the abyss and emerged bearing the scars of battle and sorrow, but unbroken. The fight to end the curse was just beginning. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the hollow streets of Arroyo Seco, carrying with it the faintest echo of children's laughter, a sound both innocent and haunted, a reminder of what was lost and what might yet be saved. And in the depths below, the well waited, silent and hungry. The struggle was far from over, but Mara Silva had made her stand. The air within the well was thick and suffocating, a black void pressing against Mara's lungs like the weight of centuries. Every breath tasted of dust and despair. The silence around her, a heavy shroud broken only by the faint, uneven breaths of Tomas nestled against her chest. His small, trembling body was fragile beneath her arms, sun-bleached hair matted with dirt, eyes wide but dulled by fear. Mara's heart pounded fiercely, a relentless rhythm that anchored her to this nightmare. They had descended into the abyss together, but now the task was to escape it. The darkness shifted, as if alive, a living shadow curling and twisting beyond the edges of her vision. The Hollow One's presence was a suffocating force, an insatiable hunger that clawed at the edges of her sanity. Yet Mara's resolve burned stronger. "Hold on, Tomas," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "I won't let it take you." Their path was treacherous, the air growing colder and heavier with each step upward. Mara fought against the creeping panic, the hallucinations that whispered of endless thirst and sacrifice. Images of vanished children flickered in her mind's eye, their hollow gazes imploring her to flee or surrender. But surrender was a luxury she could not afford. Tomas's frail grip on her wrist was a lifeline, a tether to the world she refused to lose. As they climbed, the oppressive darkness began to yield to a faint, distant, lighter promise of release. The walls of the well, slick and unyielding, seemed to pulse with a dark energy, a heartbeat in the abyss that threatened to trap them forever. Mara's muscles ached, her breath ragged, but the sight of that light fueled her every exhausted step. Finally, they broke through the final barrier and emerged into the blinding desert sun. Mara blinked fiercely, the harsh light searing her retinas, the oppressive heat washing over her like a physical force. Tomas whimpered softly, clutching her hand with renewed strength. Around them, the town of Arroyo Seco lay silent and still, the familiar cracked earth shimmering under the relentless sun. Mara's knees buckled, sand shifting beneath her as she sank to the ground, Tomas cradled protectively against her. The well stood behind them, a dried-up monument to dread and sacrifice. Its dark hunger momentarily sated, but never quelled. The air was thick with unspoken fear, the town's fatalism palpable even in the glaring light. When they returned to her modest home, the dim glow of a flickering candle cast long, trembling shadows across the walls. Mara gently cleaned Tomas's scrapes and bruises, her hands steady despite the turmoil within. The silence between them was profound, broken only by the occasional shallow breath or the soft scrape of cloth against skin. Their eyes met, reflecting a shared understanding of horrors endured and battles yet to come. "We're not safe yet," Mara murmured, voice tight with emotion. "But I promise, Tomas, I'll find a way to stop this, to end it." Tomas nodded weakly, his innocence battered but unbroken. Mara's gaze hardened, the weight of knowledge and sorrow settling heavily upon her shoulders. The curse of the well was no longer a distant myth, it was a living nightmare she had touched and escaped, forever changed. At dawn, Mara stood alone at the edge of the town square. The well's hollow maw yawned before her, a silent sentinel beneath the scorching sun. Around her, Arroyo Seco stirred, steeped in the same ritualistic dread that had claimed so many children before Tomas. Her fists clenched at her sides, knuckles white against sunburned skin. The desert wind whispered through the cracked earth, carrying faint echoes of laughter and loss. She took a deep breath, steady and resolute. "This ends now," she vowed aloud, voice cutting through the morning stillness. No more sacrifice, no more hunger. But as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the parched earth, Mara knew the battle had only just begun. The Hollow One's hunger was a force older than memory, nourished by fear and blind faith. Breaking the cycle meant facing an abyss not only beneath the town, but within its very soul. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the horizon where the desert met the sky. Somewhere beyond the heat and dust lay the answers and, perhaps, salvation. For Mara Silva the path forward was as uncertain as the desert winds, but her will was ironclad. She would fight, even if it meant becoming a part of the darkness she sought to destroy. The well remained, silent and waiting. The children's disappearances would continue in shadow, for now. But Mara's vow was a flicker of defiance in the suffocating dread of fragile hope that perhaps, one day, the hollow hunger could be stilled. And in the silence of the desert, that hope was all she had left. The sun hung low over Arroyo Seco, casting long, merciless shadows across the cracked earth. Mara Silva's boots crunched against the dry soil as she stepped back into the town she had fled with nothing but hope and horror in her heart. The heat was oppressive, pressing down like a living weight, and the hollow well at the town center seemed to watch her arrival with indifferent menace. The well, stripped of water but swollen with dark legend, stood as a scar in the bright desert light, a monument to a curse that had claimed to many children. Mara's eyes narrowed as she scanned the familiar yet alien streets. Faces turned toward her with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and muted fear. Whispers rippled like wind through brittle leaves. She had changed. The descent into the abyss had left its mark, not just on her body, but on her mind. The town's fatalism, once a distant murmur, now felt like a wall she needed to break through. At her mother's home, Mara found Isabel Vega waiting, her face etched with worry and relief. The reunion was quiet, the air thick with unspoken grief. "You came back," Isabel said softly, her voice trembling. "We prayed for you every day." She reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed Mara's hair back. Mara's gaze faltered, the weight of all she had witnessed threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm here," she whispered. "But it's not over. Tomas, the well. I saw what lies beneath. It's hungry still." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "This town has survived for generations. We do what we must." Mara shook her head, a fierce flame igniting within. "Survived or trapped. We can't keep sacrificing our children. I won't let this continue." The days that followed were a blur of cautious steps and whispered conversations. Mara sought out Lucia Torres under the shade of the lone mesquite tree at the dusty crossroads, where the air was thick with heat and tension. "They won't listen," Lucia said, her hands wringing nervously. "Most have accepted the well's hunger as fate. But I believe you, Mara. Tomas could have been my brother." Benito Cruz stood nearby, his rugged features set in grim determination. The desert doesn't forgive weakness, but maybe it respects courage. Together, they began to weave plans. fragile threads of resistance amid the town's entrenched silence. Mara's presence stirred old fears and new hopes alike. Some townsfolk watched from shadowed doorways, their faces tight with worry or scorn. Each evening, Mara found herself drawn to the well's edge as dusk bled into night. The fading light seemed to awaken the dark moor, pulsing faintly as if alive. The air was thick with the scent of dust, dried earth, and something deeper and ancient hunger that whispered in the wind. Standing there, Mara felt the weight of countless vanished children and the enduring curse pressed down on her soul. She clenched her fists, resolve hardening like the cracked stones beneath her feet. This ends, she vowed into the gathering darkness. Yet, as the stars blinked coldly overhead, the desert held its breath, watching, waiting. The echoes of the hollow well whispered promises and threats alike. The nightmare was far from over. Mara's return had ignited a spark, but the path ahead was shadowed and uncertain. The town's fate and her own, balanced on a knife's edge where hope and despair waged a silent war beneath the unforgiving sun.